for Maverick, like I had someone who believed in me and encouraged me, and I hadn't had that in my career. I hadn't had that. Honestly, I really hadn't had that much in life. Anyone who would take an interest to encourage me and put me on, and it's an emotional thing to talk about. Somebody, who believes in you and thinks that you can do it. And I look at our team of 250 or whatever we're at now, employees at the company, and how can I be that encouragement? How can I develop people? Still being direct and honest, and it's not always easy conversations. But we want to do the best possible work. We want to tell the best stories, and we want to be entertaining, and we want to do that. It's really important that we feed into the people who are the makers, who make the things, and we pour into the athletes the same way. And, sometimes you're an athlete with a $25-50 million a year deal, and sometimes you're athletes who lost your career in 1 year or never made it, right? But we tell your story regardless if it's a great story. And so, that's a long answer to your question, but it's truly, how I got here is unique. There was no degree for being the GM of Uninterrupted. There was no education that could have prepared me for this job.
Welcome to the Raw Facts podcast. I'm your host and producer, Ben Arthur, joined by Jimmy Spencer. He is the Senior Vice President and General Manager for Uninterrupted. Jimmy, thank you so much for joining the show. How's everything going?
We are in July. As you know, with sports, this is like off season, but for us, it's on season. So we're busy and cooking, but great to chat with you.
Yeah, thanks again for joining me. And Jimmy, everyone kind of knows Uninterrupted, what the brand is. LeBron James and Maverick Carter started the brand. It's a kind of a player empowerment and storytelling brand. But kind of with your role in particular, what does your day-to-day look like? What's kind of your role in making the machine work, so to speak?
Yeah, it's changes by the day. Sometimes it changes within a single meeting. But my big role here is to elevate the voices of the athletes that we work with, and ultimately to do it in a way that's entertaining and creative, right? We're not in the business of just telling stories to tell stories. We want to tell the best stories. And Uninterrupted over the years has really carved out a space where athletes get to tell the stories in the way that they design and that they want to create. But it's more than just documentaries. It's product. We're constantly looking at how does the hat that we make that you might see on LeBron's head, what's the story behind that hat? How are we telling that story? Or, today, the sports news, you might be wondering about the NFL running back and how their contract situation looks and how they're banding together and what they're looking like. And I'm asking the team, what's Uninterrupted's role in this? Who are the running backs that we want to reach out to and come to them and say, hey, how can we help elevate the story you're trying to tell right now? But we are and have always been of the athlete and here to empower athletes as creators. And what we do is we act as the storytelling vessel. And so I have maybe the best job in the world. I get to help athletes tell the stories the way they want to do it. And that can look like I said, that can look like a documentary. It can look like a clip that goes on digital, or it can be an event. It can be anything. And so very lucky, blessed to be in this position. But day to day, sometimes I'm worried about the next big documentary we do. Sometimes I'm, meeting with a high school athlete and hearing their hopes and dreams, or meeting with a NBA MVP and trying to figure out what it is they want to make. And so that's the day to day. We got a large team here, brilliant people way smarter than I am, who are able to tap in and figure out ideas that people are into.
Definitely. And yeah, it's very important to kind of keep people around you that are smarter than you, I think, in my personal opinion, to kind of bring the best out of.
Very easy thing for me, by the way, Ben. Very easy for me to keep smarter people. Doesn't take much.
For sure. And Jimmy, what is it like being able to work with LeBron and Maverick Carter, two guys who've really been able to carve a niche for themselves in the business space, sports entertainment space? I'm not quite sure. Maybe maybe you talk to them every day. Maybe it's once a week, once a quarter. How does that dynamic maybe look like, and their input in terms of you helping to guide your team?
Yeah, I mean, with LeBron, obviously he has a strong day job, so it depends on the season,
Yeah.
and what we're looking to do. LeBron is still, he's the chairman of Uninterrupted. He is the lead, the founder, along with Maverick, and between him and Maverick, I couldn't tell you, and I say this in the room with them and out of the room with them, but just two really kind, good people. And I call it like the Midwestern people. Here I'm
Mm.
born and raised in California, and California has a reputation that I don't think it's always fair because it's a melting pot. But when you get people who are from, in this case, from Akron, Ohio, they carry that with them. You feel it. You feel this family vibe. You feel this, like, obviously the loyalty is strong. You've seen with that group, and you get a sense of who they are as people. And I've worked with them now just about 8 years, in capacity. And I'm not saying this because they signed the paycheck, maybe a little bit, but I'm saying it from the standpoint of uh, good people who I trust, and I trust that they are working levels above what people would even imagine, in terms of
Yeah.
their ability to think and plan and understand brand and understand opportunity. So I'm very, very much learned a lot in my years here. I've been, maybe I call it the school of Maverick Carter. I've gotten to be under his tutelage now for 8 years. And so for him, it's there's rarely a day that goes by where we're not in some form of communication. He's very much. We just did the Uninterrupted Film Festival in Los Angeles, and LeBron was there, Maverick was there. Maverick's the one giving the toast. He's the one sitting on a panel with Joel Embiid to talk about the partnership we do. He's our Jerry West to the NBA. He's our logo, and I think that people, I've watched Maverick grow incredibly during this time, what he's accomplished, what he's done, the notoriety and the amount of people who want to work with him. And so a lot of times I stay focused on, my day job is uninterrupted, and making it go, but so lucky to have the support, the encouragement, the growth of those two. But also just, again, what they've meant to our business. It's been tremendous, the cheat code that they are.
Jimmy, you mentioned that you've been working with them for 8 years. Did you have maybe one LeBron story that you can tell that maybe stands out, that maybe goes along the lines of you saying how he maybe just thinks about things on a different level? Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I have a few. I have one funny story, which is when I was in high school, I played on an AAU basketball team that, like, our high school put together. And so these are, anyone who knows Marin County, it's just north of San Francisco, and it's I don't know how you call it, an affluent community not known for basketball, right? We
Mhm.
have maybe Will Venable, who went on to be an outfielder for the San Diego Padres and later some other teams, and is in the manager game right now, is the pride of Marin County hoops. I feel like maybe the only guy who ever went on to play a sport at a high level and was the best in that world. But I had this AAU team, and we would play in Alameda during the summers, in the east, so Oakland area, and we played the Soldiers, and LeBron was a part of that Soldiers team,
Oh,
and along with, my memory serves me correctly, so was Leon Poe. Um,
oh, okay.
and so we show up to these hangars, kids from Marin, not known for basketball, uh, all 6'3", 100 and whatever, 30 pounds probably that I was at the time. Um, but LeBron was not on that trip. And so I tell that story.
Ah,
I was telling that story. We were on a taping of The Shop, and I was telling that story. And all of a sudden, I hear behind me in that deep voice, I hear, "Lucky for you." And it's just the type of personality, he takes basketball seriously. He was, and very much lucky for me, by the way, that he wasn't on the court. But, when I think about him at Uninterrupted, and a story that stands out to me is we had, it's just, I'll just say it this way. It's just how much, he can be in a conversation and be very easy to work with, but also what a pro he is. We had a shoot that stands out to me, for calm. Calm, the app, mental health app. This was
Mhm.
a few years back or so. And LeBron he was doing bedtime stories or stories, to help people go to sleep. And so he's at a microphone just like you and I, and this thing goes on for a while, right? This is hours of work, 3 hours setting, maybe 4 hours. And I'm trying to do my best to help and like, hey, you need a break, like you good? Like need a break time. And he's like, no, I'm good. I'm locked in. And the work ethic, the professionalism, always on time, right spot, the way he carries himself. There's so many athletes that we work with that come in our office that I'm like, you don't understand what it takes. It'd be like saying, I want to, a lot of times people say, I want to do what LeBron does in the business world, business space, is the equivalent of saying, I want to be like Steph Curry from the 3-point line. But do you put in the hours? Do you put in the
Yeah.
work? You don't show up to do it. You don't just put anybody around you. Like, this wasn't just a random collection of people. Like Maverick Carter, best in the business when it comes to brand and sports marketing and business, and LeBron chose him and saw that in him and empowered him to be that. And he grew. And obviously the story about Rich Paul and everybody who's been around LeBron. But I think it starts with that work ethic and that focus. And they all have that, I think
Mm.
those guys that I named just now, Rich, Randy, Mav, and PR, Paul Rivera, who's also very much a part of that family. These are guys who are great at what they do.
And Jimmy, kind of back to you now. Your first career, you were an NBA reporter. You worked for a number of kind of high profile news outlets. What kind of led to your shift into kind of doing what you do now, like from traditional sports media to kind of helping athletes tell their stories, like in partnership with them? What was kind of maybe the spark into you jumping spaces?
Yeah, I have a Forrest Gump career. That's like the thing I always say. I've jumped around and hopped around in different things. And like, for those people who are listening, who are always trying to find their role and their spot, I talked about coming here 8 years ago, and I'm 40 years old now, so that means I was 32 when I did it. When I found that role, but I felt like a little bit of a journeyman, and I finally found the right team, so to speak, around me. And I was a sports writer coming out of college. I was editor in chief. And first off, go all the way back. I had a 0.5 GPA sophomore year, three D's, three F's, was
Oh
not
man.
successful in anything. A lot of that plays into, sadly, a lot of anxiety issues and not going to class, which will bring you to a 0.5 GPA. But I wasn't a good student, and I failed English, so I wasn't a writer. I wasn't a good writer in my mind at the time, right? But maybe that's more about trying to read like the Odyssey and trying to write a report on it. Excuse me. And so I say that though to set the tone for, I didn't know what I wanted to do necessarily even when I was in college, and I kind of fell into writing. The growth happened, somewhere middle of college. I started to succeed in writing. I liked what it meant to tell a story. I liked getting response from people. There's a vanity in that. Um, and I became editor in chief of my campus newspaper. I got a job at the Sacramento Bee newspaper. I got to cover the Kings. I had a sports editor at the time, Bill Bradley, who still in the game, who gave me a shot. And this was the time the internet was becoming a thing. He's like, hey, can you run some of the digital stuff? And so I was doing some of that early audio recording, publishing up to the website, put me in an NBA Kings locker room, got to know people. And you fast forward, I was a NBA sports writer, bounce around, but you move ahead to around 2000 and what is it, 2013, about 10 years ago. I was a teacher. I was teaching high school English and coaching basketball, and that was the life I thought I wanted. Sadly, stayed the teacher game. I couldn't afford to teach. It was too.
Mm.
I was getting paid 40K, trying to live in San Francisco. And so naturally, I tried to find some side hustles, and I went back to what I know, which is writing. And I was covering the NBA as an interim beat reporter. The guy Matt Steinmetz, who used to still is in the game as well, but was the Comcast Sportsnet Bay Area Warriors insider. And when he stepped away, I just was filling in, covering some of the Warrior stuff, making a little more money there. And then I was working for Bleacher Report. I was writing at least weekly, doing a like $250 a pop an article. Excuse me. And all that said, I was struggling to put it all together. Right, it wasn't sustainable. Teach, coach, write for this outlet, write for that outlet.
Mm-hmm.
Putting it all together was hard. I ended up getting a deal with Bleacher Report to be a national NBA writer for them. I left teaching, left everything. It was great. I was doing my thing, but this game's not easy. You understand. A lot of writers out there understand where it is, and so into my contract, I was let go out of the blue. A newlywed trying to figure out life, and really started to question at that point. Why? Like, do I suck? Am I a terrible writer? Am I not meant to be in this world? Well, should I go be something else? Should I go find a job with, I don't know, the state of California, whatever, right? To pay the bills. I wanted a family. I wanted all those things. And so it's tough. I think a lot of people go through times where you question your career and you question whether or not you're in the right space, or you're good at your job, or it's what you love and you're passionate about. And it was hard because I felt that way about writing. I felt that way about covering the NBA. And I really lost a lot of confidence in that moment. And it was tough. You look back and you learn more about why things happened the way they did. And if you're talent on anything, you're the first to go if they need to clear up some budget to bring on other talent or bring on anything else. That's exactly what happened. And it wasn't the right position for me. It ended up being the biggest blessing, because I moved over and I was in kind of the tech startup space for a little bit, doing content and things, but still kept a foot covering the NBA. And I stayed in that space. And one day I got a phone call from a dear friend of mine who I started working with back in the day at the Sacramento Bee, Sam Amick, who's still today, he writes for The Athletic, covering the NBA for The Athletic. And Sam and I worked at the Bee together. And he's like, hey, a friend of his who had known Maverick and LeBron were looking for an opportunity. This guy, Adam Mendelson, who works with LeBron on the communication side and has for years, still does. Just saw him the other day. And the opportunity was pretty basic. It was LeBron and Maverick want to start a content company around athletes and tell stories, and they're looking for somebody. And I can remember where I was. I was walking around on the Embarcadero in San Francisco at the time, taking the phone call, the wind blowing in the phone, I could barely hear. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a heck of an opportunity, right? That I'm looking for, a very different, unique opportunity. Everything at that time was starting to really, the Maverick LeBron business side, like things were turning to gold around them, right? And I was like, I can't miss this opportunity. But it wasn't a job offer. It was just an opportunity to talk more about the job. And so I flew down to Los Angeles and met, of all places, was Jimmy Iovine's house, was where Maverick was staying at the time in LA. He was basically using his house as kind of an in-between while he was establishing the Spring Hill Uninterrupted deal. And I hadn't been around money like that before, or seen a house that damn nice before. And so there's a little bit of me where it felt like fish out of water, like imposter syndrome. I'm this like kind of somewhat, if you want to call it, like floating, struggling writer, trying to make ends meet, trying to figure things out. And I'm in this space. And the time I just found out too, my wife was pregnant. So we had our first child coming. I'm interviewing for this job in LA. And obviously everything worked out. I was offered the role and became the first employee at Uninterrupted. And yeah, this fall will be 8 years. But at the very beginning, it clicked with Maverick and really understood the mission. And I think it goes to show, gifts. Like you always hear, everybody has a gift. Everybody has a calling, an opportunity, whatever that is. My gift was always, as a writer, my ability to relate to athletes. It's why Sam put me in touch with the group because he had seen what I was able to do from a relationship standpoint with Steph Curry when I was covering the Warriors in Oakland and some of the players in Oakland, the access that I was able to have and the relationships. And to this day, I look at my collection of experiences, teaching, covering sports. All of it was built around developing great relationships, hearing people, and helping them tell a story and helping tell their story. And that's what I've had the opportunity to do at Uninterrupted. And so my gift has been on display, but I've also had, and for Maverick, like I had someone who believed in me and encouraged me. And I hadn't had that in my career. I hadn't
Mm.
had that. Honestly, I really hadn't had that much in life. Anyone who would take an interest to encourage me and put me on. And, it's an emotional thing to talk about, somebody, who believes in you and thinks that you can do it. And I look at our team of, 250 or whatever we're at now, employees at the company, and how can I be that encouragement? How can I develop people still being direct and honest? And it's not always easy conversations. But we want to do the best possible work. We want to tell the best stories and we want to be entertaining. We want to do that. It's really important that we feed into the people who are the makers, who make the
Mhm.
things, and we pour into the athletes the same way. And sometimes you're an athlete with a 25, $50 million a year deal, and sometimes you're athletes who lost your career in 1 year or never made it, right? But we tell your story regardless if it's a great story. Um, and so, that's a long answer to your question, but it's truly, how I got here is unique. I didn't there was no degree for being the GM of Uninterrupted. There was no education that could have prepared me for this job. Um, I learned on this job. Our president of the company, Devin Johnson, who sat in this seat as general manager of Uninterrupted at the very beginning as well. That man teaches me so much, every day. Just now, we're in meetings and we're exploring, the business side of things more that I've grown and learned. And so again, it's a constant evolution at 40 years old, still growing, still turning into, who it is that I can be.
Jimmy, what are the things that maybe stand out to you the most about that journey, right? That the 8 years, because you said kind of that first meeting with Maverick and him believing in you and knowing where you were at that time, right? Kind of struggling to make ends meet. You're in the tech space, kind of writing, but struggling, teaching and struggling. And you have this guy who believes in you and looking at all that you've accomplished now 8 years later along the way, what are maybe kind of those pride points, the things um, you kind of think about the most when you think about kind of this massive journey for you into becoming who you are now in
Yeah.
through Uninterrupted.
Yeah. I'll stick with the theme of relationships. It's the people I've met along the way that have taught me the most. And I think about how we look at athletes and how we view athletes, and we're all guilty of it. We have this side of us that plays fantasy football, or you read the headline and screw this guy. I hate this guy. This guy's, whatever. Um, I think for me though, it's the human side of the athlete that is what I'm most intrigued by and what stands out. And there's a couple pieces that come to mind. We did a piece with Josh Gordon that I think is one of the best things we've done at the height of when he was in rehabilitation and he was out of the NFL. And we as a team sat with him and put out a piece that really started to unpack that this isn't a guy who just chose smoking weed over playing in the NFL, the way it's put on television or famous
Yeah.
clips are said, famous Stephen A. clips, laying off the weed or put it out there. This is a guy who you look at his family history, you look at where he grew up and how he grew up, the circumstances in which he grew up, how he was handled within college football, the passes he was given, and the things that started to not encourage drug use, but really allowed it and enabled it in a way. And his own. And I remember when we did the piece, it's like, you got to own this too, though. This isn't about, you can't be a puff piece, right? It has to be real. And he told a real story. And I respect that guy so much. And I remember sitting with him before and after, and hearing his journey just enlightened me. right? And it grew me as a human to understand everybody's journeys and unique journeys, and understand why he has had different chances, because I think he's done a good job articulating his journey and being honest about it. And the other one we did a piece on a golfer, Kendra Little, and it just taught me so much. It's about, she was born intersex, and her journey of what that has been like in her life and in her career in sports and with her family and her parents. But it was a really raw piece. I think it's one of the best pieces we've ever done.
Mm.
And Kendra became a friend through the process, hearing her journey and her story. But it just taught me so much, again, about a subject I had no idea about, and who a lot of people today have such strong opinions on. When you talk about like different rights of people, whether that be someone who's intersex, or you think about someone who's trans, or somebody who's gay, or whatever that looks like, I'm always like, just hear their story. Like, if we could, as a society, empathize more and understand more, sometimes I just want to have people watch that 10-minute piece and just say,
Mm.
like, before you go throwing stones, watch these pieces. Those are the things I'm most proud of. Those are the stories that I want to tell more of, and that I want to make. I think that's what makes Uninterrupted stand out.
For sure. And Jimmy, I'm curious, in what ways do you think, because there's kind of like traditional sports journalism, kind of what you came up in, right? As covering the NBA for the SACB and whatnot, and kind of this new media. I use quotations because that's kind of how it's labeled, like with player-driven content, like what you guys do at Uninterrupted, what the Players Tribune has done. We see so many guys have their own podcasts now, and it feels like they can kind of tell their own stories and not need maybe the traditional reporter to kind of tell that story maybe in a way that used to be. I get my kind of a long way of asking, like, how do you think those two sides of sports media can coexist in kind of this landscape that we live in, being a guy who's kind of seen and worked in both sides?
Yeah, I think that there's room for, you walk around a bookstore, right? And you're going up and down the aisles, and let's say you saw a book on Michael Jordan, right? And that book could be written by Ben Arthur, and you're like, oh, biography on Michael Jordan, I want to read this. Right next to it could be a book, Michael Jordan by Michael Jordan. Now, if you're a big Michael Jordan fan, you're going to buy both those books. And
Mm.
that's how I see this idea of player control media. It's like there's room for both, because the appetite is there, and they feed off one another too, which is the thing that I think that's why Draymond is such a genius. And I think he just did a live podcast at our film festival, him and Trey Young. And I've watched Dre. I've watched the progression of him from, covered him actually as a writer when he was a rookie, right? So I was a media member, putting a microphone in his face, to then coming to Uninterrupted, where he was one of our partners from the beginning. And he had a podcast here, Dre Day, and watched the evolution to where he is today. He is so damn good. Forget that he's a basketball player. Just as a talent behind a mic, he's just great at asking the right questions, going to the places, getting trust, all those things we're talking about. Um, but guess what? He's feeding off a lot of his points in his show is things that are being said in the media that he's responding to, or he's engaging, and it feeds. And so he says that, and then boom, next day, first take, you might get a Draymond quote from his show feeding traditional media. And so I think all it's doing is sports isn't going anywhere, right? We're seeing the numbers, the revenue, the valuations of these teams, the interest of fans, the growing audiences. There's room for all of this content, and there's room for hearing it in different ways. And sometimes I want to hear the Travis Kelce show after a game, because I want to hear Travis's response to something. Travis and Jason, the New Heights podcast that I wish they were doing here, but shout out to Wave TV. They sometimes I want to hear that, right? I want to hear from that perspective. But guess what? Other times I just want to hear Colin Cowherd talk about the NFL and give me some hot takes and go hard. As a sports fan, I want all of it. And so I think it coexists very well. I think it feeds off one another. We look at traditional media here as friends. We've never ever taken the stance that like we need to change it up. And I think it's in a great spot right now.
Yeah, I think that's a really kind of great perspective because I think unfortunately a lot of people look at them as kind of two competing things, but I think just in the world we live in, we kind of need both, right? And I think the fan is willing to consume both. So I
Mhm.
think that's great perspective, Jimmy. Um, I want to shift gears a little bit. I know that you're the co-founder of a foundation called the Cheat Code Foundation. I want to make sure I get this right. A mental wellness organization that works with athletes and entertainers to help them get to help get mental health access to underserved communities. And I remember you saying earlier about how you had battled anxiety during your college years. I guess, long story short, I guess maybe what maybe spurred kind of wanting to have this foundation and to prioritize mental health in that way.
Yeah. So I did mention, early my journey with anxiety started around 12 years old that I can remember. Maybe it was sooner, but
Mm,
I could remember being in sixth grade and feeling like I was going to throw up every class I was in. I just felt
mm,
like I couldn't focus. I couldn't threw me off track. I didn't have a strong quality of life when I was 12 years old. You know, had a great supportive mom. I had sports. I had all the fun things, but I didn't have my calm. I didn't have a mental wellness, so to speak. And it came and went through high school, through college, through my 20s, through my 30s. But right prior to the pandemic, in this job here, I couldn't sit in a boardroom. I couldn't sit in a meeting without feeling claustrophobic, without worrying like, was I going to throw up? Was I going to piss my pants? Was I going to like all these strange, like illogical things would enter my mind, right? And I would catastrophize it. Fear of death, fear of this, fear. Really, OCD behavior is what it's called, anxiety, OCD, and the compulsion to try and control things that were uncontrollable, but also really a lot of like just negative thoughts that would enter my head and linger there. Um, and I had never treated that with anything. It had just been there. Imagine like the worst toothache your whole life, living with it and never going to a dentist. And my best friend and confidant and everything is guy Dr. Armando Gonzalez, who's a therapist. And I asked him, and I was like, "Look, man, I'm out. Like, I don't think I can. I don't think I can do this anymore. I can't do my job." And I wasn't to a point of suicidal, but I was giving up like what I thought life could be for me because I couldn't be. I just couldn't be relaxed. I couldn't do my job, and it was getting worse. And he introduced me to a type of therapy called brain spotting, which is a methodology that really has you. Sounds like you're going into surgery or something, or but really what it is a methodology where you have headphones in the way I do now. There's bilateral music, meaning music in one ear and then the other, and kind of
mm,
rotating. And you kind of, a lot of where you process. There's something about. I'm not a scientist in this at all, but there's something about where your eyes wander and drift, and where you start to process. And I met with a woman in Los Angeles, in Century City, Dr. Gray, Meredith Gray, and she she really helped me process things. You're staring at like she'll take so I'm talking to you, and you start seeing that I'm digging into some like trauma, right? Some things. Trauma doesn't mean that like I got shot or something terrible happened. Trauma could be anything. Trauma could be I got made fun of in sixth grade. Trauma could be I fell once and really hurt my leg, and now I'm fearful. Like it could be small, little micro things, right?
mhm,
Fear of abandonment, those kind of things. So you'll stare at the pointer, and you start processing at that point. A lot of things come out of you. I remember because I'd done cognitive behavioral therapy. I tried that before, and I started to write stuff down when we were talking. And she's like, "Jimmy, you could put the pen down. You're doing the work right now. You're processing this out." Um, I did a good amount of sessions prior to the pandemic, actually, um, and I started to really feel healing. Um, there was a combination of therapy, learning about fitness and exercise and diet and breath work and all these different tools, as well as going on an antidepressant, Lexapro, that I was on and was on for about 3 years.
Mm.
And found such healing in that. And I remember talking to Armando, who had put me onto all this, and he works with athletes, and big name athletes. And Lindsey Vaughn wrote about him in her book, and he works with the Tennessee Titans, and he works with Major League Baseball players like Dansby Swanson. He's got, there's stories written on this stuff. And I said, I love that you're making really successful people more successful and living better lives, but look what's happening. Look at the gap that's going to exist, right? The inequality gap that's going to exist between the haves and the have-nots.
Mhm.
If the haves can get better and heal, because when I did those brain spotting sessions, they were expensive. I felt it. They were not cheap. Most people couldn't afford that or do that, and most people can't even get the time away from their job to be able to do that and afford that, right? Especially you start talking about parents or single moms or and so I made him promise me that he wasn't going to do it just for the successful people, that we would create a system to bring this type of therapy to people who need it, who couldn't afford it. And that's the foundation and that's the mission, and oftentimes I get emotional thinking about those people who can't heal. I'm still on my journey. I'm not fully healed. I battle it. It's almost like the way they talk about addiction, you're always going to be addicted. Like for me, I'm always going to have this anxiety. I know it. Will be in therapy on Friday, and I'm constantly working through how am I managing my stress at the office. How am I making sure this anxiety from work's not encapsulating too much of my headspace. It's an ongoing battle and it's a passion, um, but that's the foundation. The foundation is we're working to figure that out, and we're going to be partnering with more and more organizations to get it out there. We've had conversations with the Surgeon General's office. We've had at the United States. We've had conversations with at the state level in California. There's work going on in Tennessee now that's going to happen through the Titans organization with Armando and his work there. So we're doing it. We're making strides, but it's a huge passion of mine.
I guess maybe from a project standpoint, what can you maybe tell us about uh, what Mav, LeBron, what you guys see as being next for this brand for Uninterrupted?
Yeah, we are first and foremost. I'm excited to say, and we're going to start building it out. But we're going to do more and more in women's basketball, and
Okay.
I think a lot of people are falling in love with the game more and more. The game continues to get just more fantastic by the season. I think you just look at what LSU did this year and how that captured the nation. And Caitlin Clark, Juju Watkins in our backyard. We have a lot of projects we've done with her already. Being the Gatorade Player of the Year, and then coming to USC, staying in the backyard. Um, but I'll be honest, not a lot of content that young hoopers on the women's side specifically have out there that speaks to them, where they're going to say, "Oh, I feel seen. This is content for me. This is stories for me. I want to build that, and I want to do it better than anybody." And we have the team. We have a team of women here who are gung ho on the project, inclusive of our whole team. Obviously, it'll be a diverse effort. Um, and we have the talent. We have the athletes that want to rock with us and want to do this and create that. And that's one house that we're going to build here, right? But I think when you look at audience and going, people these days, it's hard to find somebody who loves tennis and loves golf and loves the NFL and loves college basketball. It's harder to do all that to want give all that to one audience, right? So I think you go down, you start saying who are the audiences specifically that Uninterrupted needs to reach. To me, that's a market that's we're gonna go out there and plant a flag, right? And I feel really good about the Flage Johnsons of the world,
Mhm.
who are showcasing what Uninterrupted is all about. She performed at our athlete party last week, and I was at the time I was having a conversation with Sue Bird, who's obviously a goat and in
Legend.
her own right,
Yeah.
done her own thing, a legend. and Sue's someone with many talents herself. And I said, it's not fair. There's people like yourself, Flage, who have all these talents. I don't even have one talent. I have Flage, who just won a national championship, who's a top level, be a professional basketball player, who's also has like a whole different artistry and a career in music. And to me, I'm like, that's the next athlete right there. Those athletes who, are their stories are going to be on First Take. Those are the stories that we're going to start seeing more and more of. And so I want to have a space there. So I'm really invested in that right now,
Mm,
and building that. And we're close, and we'll unveil a lot soon. And further to that, it's like, what is Uninterrupted doing in the high school space at large? We have Top Class that we've built out and has been large. What are we doing in mental health? We have soul training with Ricky Williams, and Armando, who I mentioned, Armando Gonzalez, talent on that. Ricky Williams, who his story, 10, 15 years ago was very different if it happened today, and how he's looked at for what he was battling and with his own social anxiety. And by the way, there's not a more interesting man in the world than Ricky Williams. He's an
facts.
incredible guy. He's so untapped. Like, he deserves his flowers. That the man is like, he's a true guru and a genius, and incredible that we are working with him and we'll keep working with him. But yeah, what are we doing in the wellness space, right? And being able to plant a flag there. So, but more than anything, Uninterrupted, I want to be known as the best storytellers in the business, and we got to prove that out. We got to keep getting better and telling better stories, bigger stories, and making the work shine.
Love it. Well, everyone, this has been Jimmy Spencer, Senior Vice President and General Manager for Uninterrupted. Thank you so much for joining the show, and appreciate all of you for tuning in, for listening, for constantly rocking with me. This has been the Raw Facts Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on YouTube, and please follow the show on Instagram and Twitter. Really appreciate the support. Jimmy Spencer, thank you so much for joining the show, and looking forward to see what Uninterrupted has in store moving forward.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.